about this, we're prepared to do that. The president's made that clear from the very beginning.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio earlier on CBS, the Trump administration is hoping the strikes on Iran's key nuclear facilities will bring the mullahs back to the negotiating table with a sense of reasonableness from them. The Israelis are still pounding the Iranians from the air. Iran's foreign minister says the country won't resume talks unless the bombing stops. So for now, diplomacy appears to be on pause, at least until the Iranians change their tune. Back with the panel, Brigadier General John Teichert, Rebecca Grant, National Security Analyst, Joel Rubin, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, Jim Hanson, Chief Editor of the Middle East Forum. Jim, I want to start with you on this. The president keeps ratcheting up the rhetoric and the threats. One would think the Iranians might start taking him seriously after what happened a couple of days ago or last night. What is the off-ramp for Iran, and why do they seem so belligerent and unwilling to understand the military reality facing them?
They are basically an apocalyptic death cult. Your previous guest mentioned that 12er Islam has a belief that they need an Armageddon-like event to bring the Mahdi, which will help them control the world. So if that's their game, a nuclear weapon was their path to that. And that was Khamenei's big thing. That was his program. Now it's gone. Now it's smoldering rubble, and they don't have anything left. So from a face-saving perspective, I don't think they have it in them to go ahead and play the long game and say, maybe we should, retrench and go back and get back to this.
Death may be preferable for the Ayatollah and those surrounding him to a backing down.
It's go out in a blaze of glory now.
Wow.
But if they do, I think President Trump can offer them the chance. If someone can tell them, go ahead and chill for now, play the long game. We're Islam. We play the long game. The Americans play news cycles. Then maybe they can do that. And they're sure going to give it a try.
All right. Joel, I want to bring you in on this because the way that President Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu have looked at the Iranians is fundamentally different than the way the Obama administration and the Biden administration did, which was that they could be treated as rational actors and would live up to their deals in one way or the other. Fareed Zakaria over on CNN made that point. Take a listen.
He seemed to have lost faith that the Iranians were negotiating in earnest, and he seems to have gotten frustrated because I think this was not his first option. His first option was a deal with the Iranians, but the maximalist condition he placed was with zero enrichment was one the Iranians didn't seem willing to go to.
2 points. One, the Iranians I don't think have ever negotiated in good faith because it's sort of like trying to buy a Persian rug. But number two, what is the situation for the U.S. right now and also for the Jewish community in America that is now facing this situation for Democrats, especially now saying the person standing up for Israel is a Republican?
Oh, lots to unpack there. And one thing I want to mention as well, which I think is very important, is that President Obama and President Biden did not trust the Iranians in these negotiations.
Billions and billions of dollars. They just watched while they killed U.S. troops.
What we had was third-party verification, international agreements. Cheating.
Are you really going to defend this?
I'm just going to point out the fact that that is part of it. And another critical part is that President Biden, when he was working on trying to re-enter the negotiations, re-enter the deal, that didn't work out. And I think the Biden team saw that they were not getting anywhere with the Iranians. And they basically pulled up. And then October 7th happened. And as they say, the end of story for the rest of the administration. And that was very realistic. Now, Jewish community, it's a very difficult moment in the Jewish community right now. It is extremely tense. We are facing stresses here at home. The last couple of weeks, we've seen killings of young Jewish diplomats from the Israeli embassy, firebombing in Colorado, people chanting Free Palestine after it. And then on the other side, we've also seen extremism from the right. Now you add to this mix the Iranian threats, and then, of course, Netanyahu there. And I got to say, look, Israel is an American ally. This is something I try to communicate consistently to folks in my party. Israel is an American ally. Israel has not attacked the United States. Israel has not commandeered or created or advanced bus bombings and killed Americans in the field. Iran has done that. There may be annoyance or frustration about Israel amongst some, but there's a different scope.
You want the rest of the hour?
So I will get to the point that you're asking, which is we are right now in a situation where Israel partnered with the United States against an American adversary. We do this all the time. We do this with our NATO allies.
I got to get the general in real quick on this. What do we make of the disparate messages coming out of the United States? You have President Trump talking regime change, Marco Rubio saying we'll negotiate if you want to, Pete Hegseth saying we're not at war with Iran. Is this trying to give Iran options?
I think
pick one.
I think the United States is trying to give them opportunities for an off-ramp. And it's very challenging right now to imagine which off-ramp they're going to take. But by throwing out options of either escalate to de-escalate with MIGA or make Iran great again, or specifying that we're focused on a precise strike and that's it to take out their nuclear program, we are offering them options to come off the ledge and de-escalate and take a deal.
Okay. All right. We'll take a quick break here. Coming up 24 hours since the American bombing, and Democrats have a whole new message about Iran. And let's put it this way. They seem more friendly towards Iran than just about anybody right now. Why that is?
It's clear that there is no congressional authorization for Trump's war against Iran.
He could have talked to us about what the goal is and what the plan is ahead of time.
Congress should have been a full participant.
There's not much ambiguity in the Constitution about who gets to approve these things.
Democrats are furious President Trump didn't inform them of the strike first, although doing so would have almost certainly tipped off the Iranians. For years, Democrats have demanded a free Palestine. Now they will be forced to choose if they really want a free Iran. Nina Turner with us, national co-chair for Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign. Nina, and this has always baffled me. You think about all of the things that Democrats stand for: LGBTQ rights, women's rights, freedom of oppression for Muslims, among lots of other things, are all things that are horrific in Iran. Yet when President Trump talks about regime change in Iran and freeing the Iranian people, Democrats seem to be against it. Why is that?
Well, no, Leland, I think you're framing that wrong. I mean, as much as anybody who calls himself a humanitarian, I want to see all human beings be able to live a free and vibrant life. Now, we know that's complicated with human nature, but I would say that this is not about defending the Iranian government. This is really a class issue more than anything else. It's not even partisan. It really is those of us who understand how war harms communities and kills people versus those who are willing to send working class people into war. Now, you're absolutely right about the humanitarian crisis in Iran, no doubt about it. We should continue to have conversations with Iran about that, but we are not a moral authority on any of that. There are periods of time in this country where women did not have, the equal rights. We still haven't passed the Equal Rights Amendment. Poverty is high. We don't have universal
Nina, come on. Nina, you cannot possibly be trying to create a moral equivalency between what happens in Iran to people and how women are treated in Iran like farm animals to the fact that the U.S. doesn't have the ERA. Come on.
Leland, do you think that the United States of America has a moral authority, or is it that we can have conversations with countries like Iran to say there's a better way to do things? I just don't think we can war our way to peace. That is what I
you can't. Right. You can't war your way to peace unless you are dealing with people who don't want peace. And then you have to deal with them with war, because that's how they view things, a la the crowds that chant death to America. What I can't figure out is why. Hold on, just let me ask the question. For Democrats, it would seem so easy to say, so easy as we watch Yemeni militias that are backed by the Iranians take over a ship a couple of months ago. It's so difficult. Why is it so difficult for Democrats to come out and say, God bless America's Air Force that just took out Iran's nuclear program, ... We need to have a conversation about what comes next. We don't hear that. It's impossible to say taking out Iran's nuclear program is a good thing for Democrats. Why?
Leland, why are you framing it that way? This is about
because that's the reality.
Let me tell you something. Did President Trump not run and really berate, and rightfully so, President Biden for how he handled Afghanistan. He also ran saying that he would not engage in war or be in forever wars. And now all of a sudden, this is all right. I think you're conflating several things. This is about using diplomacy at all the time. We should be using diplomacy first.
Nina, diplomacy only works when it's backed up with a credible fear of violence. Number one. Number two.
But all of the experts,
Joe Biden ran away from Afghanistan, and it was a worldwide disgrace. It's why the war in Ukraine happened. Number three, the way you have peace in the Middle East is by showing strength. And again, I just asked the question, why is it so difficult for Democrats to say Iran without a nuclear weapon is a good thing? The world is safer with Fordo blown up. It shows incredible American strength. Now let's have a conversation about how to deal with the mullahs. They're not saying
you know what makes the world a safer place? No nuclear weapons. So let's talk about nuclear disarmament all the way around. That makes the world a safer place. But
we can talk about unicorns too. Come on, that's not going to happen.
But can you and I agree that it would be a much safer place if human beings didn't always
had machine guns? Birds would be afraid.
Who has the bigger bomb and who can blow each other up?
Yeah, if there was pots of gold at the end of rainbows, it'd be a fun hike. I don't know.
See, you're not being right like that. You always like to do this dance with me. I want all American soldiers to be safe. I want their families to be safe, and that is why I, as a humanitarian, am saying no war.
I'm going to give you one last question.
Hold on,
I have a question for you.
Okay.
So far, we've got two Democrats saying that they want to impeach Donald Trump over this.
No, absolutely not. Look, I'm not for the reindeer games, okay? Tricks are for kids. We had President Biden take action in Yemen. I didn't hear them say that, so I don't like hypocrisy. But the president of the United States of America, any president, so this goes for president, it was true for President Biden, it's true for President Trump or any others. Article 1 of the Constitution is very clear. Now, I heard you say on the panel that it probably would have tipped Iran off. The bottom line is that part of the Constitution is not negotiable. The president of
the legal part of it, if we're going to go through authorization of military force, but okay. I've heard that argument. Look, and the Republicans who made that argument.
But it's true.
And it was the way Barack Obama got out of Syria's red line. Nina, thank you. As always, the dance is fun. It will continue the next time you're on. We'll see you soon. Up next, to Israel, as they are under attack from yet another barrage of Iranian missiles. Whose side is time on, Israel's or Iran's, when we come back? Eastern here, NewsNation continuing coverage of the war between Israel and Iran and the fallout, you might say, or the reverberations of America's attack on Iran. We are watching the world change in real time. I'm Leland Vittert, 4 a.m. in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. So far, the Iranians have been weak in their response to the U.S.-led strikes. They have not, repeat, not targeted U.S. installations or troops as they promised to do, and as the president of the United States warned them not to. Robert Sherman reports the mullahs fired just one ballistic missile at Israel in their latest attack. Back here at home, the U.S. stealth bombers have arrived at Whitman Air Force Base in Missouri, capping off a 37-hour round-trip mission over Iranian airspace. Tonight, we can tell you that the Ayatollah in Iran has been silent. He's reportedly now being watched by a bodyguard contingent that was previously unknown, probably to everybody but the Israelis, because they seem to know everything that has happened in Iran. And the Ayatollah has reportedly picked 3 people who would be his successors if killed. Back now with the panel at the top of the hour, Brigadier General Teichert, Joel Rubin, Jim Hanson, Rebecca Grant. Rebecca, we've been saying this for a while now, and by that I mean I feel like I'm living in dog years. Every day is a month. But there's a time component to this. Either Israel and America runs out of missile interceptors, or the Iranians run out of ballistic missiles. One of those two things happens first. And obviously, we understand how that affects the strategic balance, if you will. Where are we in the time component right now?
Well, the way it looks right now is Iran will run out of missiles first. Their barrages have gotten a lot smaller. You know, back in 2024, it was 200 missiles, some drones. Now we're looking at smaller barrages. Still dangerous, still deadly. But I think they're also having difficulty with their command and control to put these together. And if you're an Iranian missile operator and the Israeli Air Force is up in your airspace, do you really want to go stand next to that missile and launch it? I think it's getting harder for them, and they are running out of options. Still very dangerous, still requires a lot of vigilance on our part.
General, the Iranians have promised massive retaliation against U.S. troops. You and I were on air last night as the Iranians were saying to America to pray for American troops. 24 hours so far, not much. Nothing, as a matter of fact. What are we to take that the Iranians are looking at in terms of what America can do on a moment's notice if they do attack?
Leland, I think something that Secretary Rubio said this morning is telling, and that is that last night, the United States reestablished deterrence and demonstrated that the military can back it up. And if you look at those forces that are arrayed around the Middle East, you know that we are postured to be able to respond to anything that the Ayatollah decides to do.
Joel, at the risk of you talking for the next hour, I'm going to ask you a question. It's okay.
I'll try not to.
Our audience would be better for it. But the fact that President Trump backed this up in the way that he did, it's one thing that we can sit around and all talk about Iran. It is a whole nother thing to sit around and think about what Vladimir Putin's thinking and what Xi Jinping is thinking. This has to change the strategic balance, not just in the Middle East, but in the world.
It must. I think that what he did surprised everybody, clearly. And, you know, there were a lot of snarks and questions about his 2-week window. And it turns out it was jiu-jitsu and that he actually executed quite effectively in a stealthy manner. So, yes, to that point, foreign leaders need to be thinking twice about what he says and thinking it may actually be true.
Is that why we've not seen Putin or Xi come out in support of the Iranians? Why we've seen them sort of quiet down?
Well, their equities are deep into Iran, and they're about to lose a client potentially. I think that they are very concerned about what the ramifications are from this strike, what it means, and, of course, their position right now. They can't be advocating for Iran without fearing repercussions.
Jim, we look now at where the Middle East is, and there's these sort of a number of off-roads that have been offered to the Iranians. And then I guess you could say, if we want to continue the metaphor, which all breaks down, but a roadblock at the end when President Trump said this morning, well, maybe regime change isn't that bad of a thing if this regime won't make a deal. Why are the Iranians, who are so clearly, I think, as the general pointed out, completely outmatched militarily, facing overwhelming U.S. military force from submarines under the water to what we saw the B-2s flying over and what they could do? Why are they continuing this?
Because it's a religious battle to them. You know, this is not.
So it's real.
Oh, for them, it's eternity. It's paradise. It's all those things tied up. And they don't want to give up that dream they've been at with the revolution for 45 years.
You agree with the concept that, yes, there's a chance this wildly escalates in the Middle East. There's also a chance that this reshapes the Middle East, and post-October 7th, the real problem in the Middle East, Iran, is going to be completely taken apart, first by the Israelis and then by the Americans with a capstone?
President Trump's first trip was setting up that new golden age for the Middle East by going to Qatar, UAE, and to the Saudis. So he got their buy-in on, we're going to deal with Iran. The Israelis will probably be involved with this. What happens after that, they're all on board with. So at some point, the Iranians either decide it's all or nothing, and they go in and lose it all, or they take one of these many off-ramps, and, you know, we have elections or we have something to throw a bone to the fact that we're not just letting the same tyrants back into power.
Dan Turrentine is here, former Democratic Party strategist. Dan, good to see you as always. Thank you. I've been curious about the Democratic response to this. I get that everything Donald Trump does is bad domestically. Should Democrats be worried that, A, if this works out, but B, I think more importantly, being seen as not supporting the president when you've got 70,000 American service members in harm's way may politically not work with traditional value Americans, patriotic Americans.
Yeah, no, Leland, I think you're exactly right. You know, and it reminds me of 2006 when Democrats won the House back. And if you recall, there was all this chatter in our base about defunding the war in Iraq, cutting off the funds. And Nancy Pelosi, who I think everyone agrees was a very strong leader, said absolutely not. That is not a serious thing. Knock it off. Well, now the tail's kind of wagging the dog within our party. You know, you have people like AOC and others out in front saying that, you know, he should be impeached. And it's just not a serious thing. We can debate, you know, where this war should go from here. What are the next steps? You know, how involved should we be with regime change? Those are all legitimate topics that I actually think the president is giving a lot of consideration to. But the Democratic Party's got to be careful, because otherwise, as you say, the American people just won't listen to anything we have to say.
Yeah, I think there's also a message here that was delivered by the U.S. military. Secretary Rubio said, yes, deterrence has been reestablished, but also the might of the American military has been established. You send B-2s 37 hours round trip. You hit targets within 10 or 12 feet of where you plan to hit them. You return home and you put 70,000 men worth of carriers, fighter air wings, refueling tankers, and the like into the Middle East. There's something that makes Americans proud about that I don't think is being acknowledged.
Yeah, and look, the other part of that, Leland, is it has been the policy of the United States, Democratic or Republican presidents for the last 30, 40 years, that Iran cannot achieve nuclear weapons, right? Different administrations, Barack Obama, Bill Clinton's, Joe Biden's, have done kind of covert operations, right? So it's not new that Iran is an enemy, that we've been trying to stop them. But I agree with you. I mean, for the party to just talk process and not acknowledge the act is not smart.
Yeah, it's bewildering to me. General, I wanted to just bring you back in on this. There is this idea that the Middle East is going to spin out of control and somehow this is going to spark World War III, on and on and on. I think what I heard you say earlier, effectively, though, was the amount of force that has been moved into the Middle East in the past 7 or 8 days basically is enough to show not only the Iranians but the world that there's not much to worry about here because of what America can do.
Leland, I think it goes back to how deterrence is established. And it's a combination of strength of capability. We've got that, but it's also strength of will. And the president showed that we've got that.
I guess that is much of a message to Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, but also a message to our allies.
I think it is an extremely important and strong message that says that the United States, in strength of capability and will, can impose that will and prevent those bad actors from malicious activities around the world.
We're watching a video from the Strait of Hormuz, which is the area 21 miles across that the Iranians have threatened to shut down. 25% of the world's oil supply goes through it every day. Rebecca, you think about the amount of U.S. military force arrayed now in the Middle East. When was the last time we saw this amount of force brought to bear and put on the level of alert it is now?
Wow. Yeah, it has been a while. But I want to say, look, we've had aircraft carriers cycling through there. Really, ever since October 7th, 2023, we have had a high force posture. But you'd have to go back to the war against ISIS to see this level of intensified air activity.
And just give us in perspective. You used to work on the air staff at the Air Force. A number of fighter air wings. You've got B-52s at Diego Garcia. You have the B-2s. Obviously, there's now air superiority of Iran for the U.S. and Israel. What does that actually mean in terms of what the U.S. Air Force can do on 24 hours, 36 hours notice from the president?
Well, as President Trump said, there are plenty of targets left. So if need be, believe me, those B-2s are back at Whiteman getting their stealth buffed up, and all the other aircraft in the region are there, and they can do anything the situation requires. Deter, contain, you name it.
Dan, where do Democrats go? Because I think what I've heard you say is they've reflexively only ever been able to be against something Donald Trump is for, impossible to praise anything he has done. If Donald Trump's superpower is getting his political enemies to take the opposite side of something, what happens if nothing happens? I mean, somehow I feel like Democrats are almost in the position of defending Iran right now.
Yeah, and that's the insanity of a lot of the statements that came out last night, and some of which, continue to come out today. Look, I think what the party needs to do is just use common sense, right? It was a successful mission the other day. The troops got home safely, which is great. We are safer for it. And then I think, look, the big question is what comes next, right? And I think if we did not knock out the facilities, if we need to have more military action, if we're going to kind of support regime change in some capacity, then Congress will have a role for that. And even Republicans were saying that today. So I think you're absolutely right. Just reflexively being knee-jerk and talking about things like impeachment is idiotic.
Yeah, well, a fairly direct answer. Dan, thank you very much. Up next, President Trump at the White House tonight. Big week coming up for him. He heads to NATO as there are new warnings about potential sleeper cells in the United States. What does that actually mean? Cities across the United States are on high alert tonight. The Department of Homeland Security has warned now about the possibility of terror within our borders by Iranian terrorists, either directed by them or inspired by them. A new bulletin from DHS reads in part, the likelihood of violent extremists in the homeland independently mobilizing to violence in response to the conflict would likely increase if Iranian leadership issued a religious ruling calling for retaliatory violence against targets in the homeland. It's a lot of words to say the Iranians might do something. Tracy Walder is with us, former CIA officer who's deployed to 9 different countries in the Middle East, Africa, and Europe, including Afghanistan during Operation Enduring Freedom. Also formerly with the FBI. Tracy, it's good to see you. Reportedly also from NBC News that there was some communique delivered to President Trump last week at the G7 summit saying effectively the Iranians threatened to activate sleeper cells, so people that they had infiltrated into the United States, presumably across the border in the past 4 years. I hear these. I've heard about sleeper cells for years. I guess my thought and question is, we've heard a lot of bluster from the Iranians. The past 18 months have sort of exposed them as fairly inept overall on how they have done things. Their past things, while scary, like trying to hire someone to assassinate President Trump, have been ham-handed at best, not exactly spy-worthy or spy thriller-worthy. Is this just a scare tactic, or is this something real?
Well, thank you for having me, Leland. I think it's both, to be completely honest with you. Listen, Iran is in a severely weakened state. That's why we struck when we did. That's why Israel's been striking when they have. There's no question they are in a weakened state. However, that being said, I do believe desperate countries sometimes do desperate things. And that's what I'm actually the most concerned about. There's no question that there's already individuals here who are either, assets of the IRGC or sympathetic to the current regime. And it only just takes one of them to do something that could kill a lot of innocent Americans.
No, that is 1,000% correct. They only have to be right once. The people who work where you used to work have to be right every single time. That said, America's heading into the July 4th weekend in 10 days, which creates a soft target in every major city across America. In your history of dealing with Iran and studying them, did the threats, and I think now the threats backed up by credibility, both that the president of the United States is willing to use them and can deliver on them, does that give the Iranians any pause?
The threats that we have against them, or the threats that they have against us, Leland?
The threats that President Trump has said, basically, that any attack on Americans, American citizens, American service members will result in an overwhelming response by the United States.
I think the issue is again, that goes back to my point that I'm not sure at this point that Iran has a lot to lose, except for really their Ayatollah, but even he has appointed successors at this point, and he's probably ineffective in a bunker somewhere. So I do think that, yes, obviously they are concerned that we will unleash whatever wrath we may against them. But at the same time, I do think because they have nothing to lose, in my opinion, makes a strike against us all that more feasible.
Okay, or that they feel, to your point, that they don't have anything to lose. The flip side of that, Tracy, and I think we have to acknowledge it, is just how much safer the world is tonight. Not just than last night, but then, say, 2 years ago, that Hezbollah is effectively been dismantled by the Israelis. Hamas severely degraded, if not gone. And now the Iranians spending most of their time worried about themselves and their own survival rather than fomenting, sponsoring, and funding terrorism around the world. That probably when it comes to the threat of Islamic terrorism, are we now in a better place?
I do actually believe that we are in a better place. I said last night, and I will quote, it's about damn time that we took some action, in my opinion, against Iran. They have been a thorn in my side since my time at the CIA. However, here's one thing I do want to caution, and I said this when bin Laden was killed, as a result of 9/11. You cannot kill an idea. That's the difficult part here.
Right.
We can take out all of these leaders. We can take out all of these countries. We can render a lot of them ineffective, which Israel has done and we have done, and I commend that. But at the same time, I am not certain that these ideas are completely eradicated. And that is my concern. I don't think they're ever going to die.
Well, a fair point, and why we need people on watch regardless. Unfortunately, we learned that the hard way over time. Tracy, thank you very much. Back now with the panel. Jim, to that point, though, nothing succeeds like success. But at the same time, when Hezbollah seemed to own Lebanon, when Hamas had launched October 7th, when Iran seemed impervious because they had the axis of resistance surrounding Israel, there was this feeling of impenetrability to them. Now that they have been exposed, it feels as though being part of that movement, as Tracy pointed out, is suddenly a lot less cool.
And deadly. It'll get you killed. I think the idea now of them going head to head, because there was an idea that, we're going to have World War III, and we don't want to poke the bear and have it come back at us with all these dangers to our actual military. I don't think our military is in the slightest bit of jeopardy. Now, we in the United States, we are one giant soft target. And as you mentioned, 4th of July coming up, there are parades and everything will be gathered. So if they decide that they want to attack, why would you go head to head and lose again against our military when you could attack the soft target if they decide to do that? Now, the point being deterrence, deterrence, deterrence. They know you want to get the bombers off the tarmac at Diego Garcia, the B-52s in the air, hit the United States and kill Americans here. So that's kind of a suicide thing. If they decide to go all the way, that would be the way to do it. And that's also the way to end their regime themselves.
Joel, again, nothing succeeds like success. I think it is fascinating to watch, including President Trump, fall in line with the Israelis, right? I mean, if you think about how Benjamin Netanyahu has redrawn the map of the Middle East since October 7th, obviously going against the wishes of the Biden administration. But then right after the bombing of Iran by Israel 10 days ago, there was this very tepid response from the U.S. administration. From President Trump was a Marco Rubio statement. We had nothing to do with this. And by the way, we'll defend Americans. Now, all of a sudden, you've got Donald Trump calling for regime change in Iran. But more importantly, you have the idea that the Strait of Hormuz may be closed by the Iranians. They may or may not be able to do it. And the Saudis are now coming out and saying, don't worry, we'll pump as much oil as we need to keep prices down. There seems to be this Israeli-led coalition now to take out Iran.
Well, events move fast, that's for sure. And I think everyone likes a winner. Look, Israel has done in the last week and a half the unthinkable that was not expected prior to that, as Jim was mentioning, the basket of nightmare scenarios. Maybe they'll come to fruition, maybe not. But no one could have predicted the kind of success that Israel's had. And I think that means that the region is saying, well, maybe there's actually a chance to move ahead from this threat that we've been living under for quite an amount of time. And the Saudis, they have no interest in having their economy hurt. And the Iranians don't necessarily even want to hit the Saudis like they did 7 or 8 years ago. There was tension. Now there's no tension. So Iran, again, to what we said earlier, is really boxed in on its targets.
All right. Up next, the Strait of Hormuz, 21 most important miles in the world and for the world economy. Why the stakes are so high and why the Iranians haven't acted yet when we come back. 24 hours in, and we are waiting to see exactly how Iran responds. They have promised strikes on U.S. bases and facilities. There's 3 ways the Iranians can respond. 1, strikes on U.S. bases. 2, a strike here on the homeland with some kind of sleeper cells. The other thing that would completely change the world economy would be shutting down the Strait of Hormuz. That is the 21 miles that go from Iran over to the Gulf states. 21 miles of the Strait of Hormuz that a quarter of the world's oil supply goes through, and Iran could easily use its Navy assets. That's its mines, that's its fast attack boats, and then hundreds, if not thousands, of anti-ship missiles that are mounted and on cars and on trucks that can drive all along the Iranian coastline. This is the nightmare scenario the U.S. Navy has been training for up to 20 years to keep the Strait of Hormuz open. One of the men who would have been responsible for that in the past years is Admiral Mark Montgomery. He commanded Carrier Strike Group 5 in the past, is now with us from the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy. Also, General Teichert with us as well. Admiral, to you first. This is what the Navy trains for. This is why they are all there. The Iranians love to put out videos of all of their fancy equipment. Is it really a match for the U.S. Navy?
Yeah, thanks for having me. You know, that's a great question. I mean, there's the question of should they do it and could they do it? And you're asking me, could they do it? And I think what they can do is they can temporarily paralyze the straits. In other words, they can take an action like dumping mines, floating mines into there, moving those, as you mentioned, the cruise missile systems. Although if they move those cruise missile systems in the open, I'm pretty sure the Israeli Air Force will visit. So they could do that. But very rapidly, the U.S. Navy and U.S. Air Force would create the conditions to remove them. And I'll tell you, the regional countries, the Gulf Cooperation Council, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Kuwait will also contribute forces that help us clear the straits and maintain the flow of fossil fuels.
All right. When we'll put up a different map which shows the amount of Navy assets, and that is both ships, that's carriers with carrier air wings, and then also submarines underneath the Persian Gulf. What did you make of the fact that in this strike, it was B-2 bombers sent from Whitman Air Force Base, 37 hours round trip, but then the use of submarine-launched cruise missiles? And why is that significant?
So the submarine-launched cruise missiles gave the B-2s brought the MOPs, and I know the general talked about the massive ordnance penetrators. They uniquely could bring those. You know, since we weren't using fighter bomber aircraft like F-15s or or F-35s to apply weapons, they went ahead and turned to the ships or submarines. The submarines are good because they launch from where you're not expecting. You don't know the submarine's there. It launches. The cruise missiles stay below 1,000 feet the whole way out, and you get a surprise delivery of about the equivalent of about 50 JDAMs worth of power with about 24 missiles. So
we're looking at this. Have you ever? When was the last time you saw this amount of naval assets pushed into a region, and what does that allow the U.S. Navy to do?
So sadly, the general and I have seen this dance about 5 times over the last 20 years. About every 3 or 4 years, we do a maximum pressure campaign. This is actually what has broken the Air Force and Navy readiness over the last 20 years. There's a whole separate argument inside the military about how these kind of deployments break us. So I'm excited in the sense of the MOP attack is we finally did the massive attack that we always build our forces up for. So I've seen this, General Mattis did this twice while he was CENTCOM commander. That is, bring in 2 carrier strike groups, an enhanced amount of aircraft, of Air Force fighter squadrons, up to 6 or 7, and the associated Army missile defense systems. So all 3 services get hit hard when we do this with extra deployments.
We're going to switch now, if we can. This is video from Press TV. That's the Iranian mouthpiece, showing their underground boat storage facilities. I guess they are either like walking through or using a drone or anything else. General, the Israeli Air Force is incredibly capable. We don't want to take away from what they did over the past 9 days, and the Israeli attacks were extraordinary. Just give us the comparison between what the Israelis were able to do, which is taking specific targets and attacking them, versus what if the Iranians decided to attack U.S. ships, the U.S. Air Force, naval carrier air wings would be able to do in, 24, 48 hours?
Leland, I think the phrase air superiority comes to mind here when you think about the ability to have cleared the airspace such that you have the permission and the permissiveness to strike at will. That means that if Iran starts to employ these types of assets, then the Israeli Air Force or the United States Air Force, the United States Navy can very easily take out those systems because they're not a threat to those aircraft that would be making those strikes.
And in terms of firepower that is able to be brought, we talk about the amount of naval assets brought in. What about Air Force assets?
I think that the combination of all of those fighter aircraft, those bomber aircraft, those electronic attack aircraft that were part of the 125 aircraft strike package from last night are a demonstration of the number and types of assets that could strike, that could jam, and that would be aware via intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance of anything the Iranians plan to do.
Real quick, Iran's regional affiliates that have been extraordinarily degraded, but there are reports tonight that the Iraqi-based Iranian militias were planning attacks on the 3 U.S. bases there. It's an area you know well. You served your last tour of duty in Iraq as the senior defense official there. How worried, you're a parent and you have a kid who's at a U.S. base in Iraq, how worried should you be tonight?
I think that you should be concerned, but you should also be comforted by the fact that those 3 primary locations of American forces in Iraq are vigilant. They are well prepared, both from a base perimeter standpoint, as well as the ability to counter any activity from those proxies that could do them damage.
General, Admiral, it is always nice to be outranked and outflanked here. I appreciate you both being with us. Thank you very much. 32 nations are coming to the NATO summit in a couple of days. President Trump shows up there, having just taken unprecedented action to change the Middle East. We would argue for the better. How does he change the world? How does the strike change the world?
The bully of the Middle East must now make peace. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier.
President Trump making it clear that Iran agrees to peace or America will ratchet up its actions. Strong words from the commander-in-chief, set to head to the NATO summit on Tuesday, where he joins dozens of world leaders. And the world has changed in the past 24 hours. President Trump also tonight started talking about regime change in Iran. NewsNation correspondent Joe Khalil live tonight at the White House. Good evening, Joe.
Yeah, Leland, good evening. So, look, obviously now this NATO summit is going to be played out much differently with the backdrop of these strikes on Iran. I had one Republican source of mine in the defense space talk about how President Trump going into this NATO summit is going to have a bit of a bargaining chip. Remember, there are still some of our NATO allies that even as late as Saturday were trying to negotiate a peace deal with Iran. My source is telling me that President Trump now can say to our NATO allies, you are welcome. Now you have a bargaining chip in that whatever negotiations come next, Iran's leverage in terms of its 3 most notorious nuclear sites, those are now off the table. So it's a different perspective there, obviously, as President Trump goes in. In many ways, he already notched a major victory in that right now you've got at least 5% that all of the NATO countries have agreed to, with the exception of Spain, to ratchet up their defense spending. This is the tweet here, the post that President Trump put out later tonight that said, we're going to keep the door open for regime change. He says, make Iran great again. Why wouldn't there be regime change? Leland, obviously that has gotten a lot of attention, especially because several other cabinet members, Secretaries Rubio, Hegseth, Vice President Vance, all today explicitly said regime change was not the goal. But remember that as President Trump says this now, again, there are still other NATO allies that are bound by defending attack on one is a defense on all. So as this White House is anticipating a potential retaliation from Iran, whether the end is regime change or not, that is something that all of them are going to have to consider consequences of, even if it is the United States right now at the forefront of trying to defend and anticipate what any retaliation looks like.
All right, Joe Khalil live at the White House. Thank you. Back with the panel, and we add in Niall Stanage, White House columnist for The Hill. Niall, in terms of how the White House walks in, how the president walks into the NATO summit, there was going to be so much focus at this NATO summit about Iran, but more importantly, perhaps for the NATO countries, about Ukraine and about how to confront Vladimir Putin. How does this change the dynamic for President Trump when he walks in to the NATO allies to say, you can trust me on Putin and on Ukraine?
Well, the problem is that they don't believe he is trustworthy on Ukraine and Putin, because they believe he has been too hesitant to back Ukraine in rebuffing the invasion by Russia.
And he will use the argument that I backed up my threats with Iran, therefore Vladimir Putin should pay attention.
But that doesn't, I mean, backing up one's threats in one instance does not mean that one backs them up in all instances. I mean, the problem is that he has telegraphed repeatedly that he does not wish to continue with the same cadence of American support for Ukraine. Whether he has bombed Iran or not, I mean, clearly he has bombed Iran, but that doesn't necessarily follow through to the Ukrainian situation.
Joel, I think there's been a lot of hesitancy by world leaders at how President Trump handles things. The results in his first term, overall, in terms of the national security, world affairs, when you look back on it, it was pretty impressive sort of results. Is there more understanding now in Trump 2.0 of giving him more leeway and more of the benefit of the doubt that you're seeing?
Well, we'll see at this NATO summit, but I think to Niall's point, look, his messaging on Russia and Ukraine has been horrible. He had that Oval Office meltdown meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky, where it looked as if he was trying to pull Ukraine's rug out from underneath it. If he wants to be strong and show resolve like he did on Iran, he needs to do the same on behalf of Ukraine to help them stand up to Vladimir Putin. If he does that at the NATO summit, that would be a big win.
Jim, I'm going to get you in here. I still can't figure out, as much as I respect these two gentlemen, how that if you're Vladimir Putin, watching the American president say, no, you don't even get 2 weeks, you aren't negotiating in good faith, we're bombing you, wouldn't give Vladimir Putin a little bit of pause right now?
Well, Putin knows we're not going to bomb him. I mean, that's a huge advantage in that, power dynamic.
But in terms of being willing to follow through on a threat.
And in that scenario, I think what President Trump has to figure out is what's the lever he's got against Putin that actually works. And he also needs to get Zelensky in line. I think Zelensky brought that upon himself when he melted down in the White House.
Agreed.
That wasn't Trump's fault. He got mouthy, and he cost himself the support that he needed. So I think between those two,
since then. But,
yeah, and I think all of it, though, makes Trump stronger going back to try and work on that, because he did what nobody else could do. Right. There is now all of that.
We got it in a quick break. Noteworthy who was standing behind the president at this speech, and also that J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio were both out on the Sunday shows. J.D. And also Secretary of Defense, who did the press conference this morning. The future of the Middle East. Will it actually be a better place after all this? Reasons to think yes. A safer place. The sun is almost up in Tel Aviv. A single missile fired by Iran into Israel overnight. That is the smallest in the rounds of attacks we have seen so far in the past 9 days. So now all eyes are on Iran and its response to the U.S. airstrikes. With that, we are back with the panel for some final thoughts. Niall, I know that you have warned multiple times that a strike on Iran ends in World War III.
I have not, but I'm glad that you're strawmanning my argument already. What are we fighting about tonight?
No, but would it be fair to say that the escalate to de-escalate strategy that Benjamin Netanyahu has brought in and that now Donald Trump is employing has certainly, destroyed, certainly deterred and degraded the biggest terror state in the world?
No, I wouldn't put it in those terms. I would say there are several things that we can say about this. Firstly, the might of the U.S. military isn't in doubt. The question is that power being used judiciously and sensibly? And the other question is, what do the Iranians draw from this? We were just talking about Russia and Ukraine, and it was said rightly at this table, we're not going to bomb Russia. Why are we not going to bomb Russia? Partly because they've 5,500 nuclear warheads. The Iranians are perfectly capable of taking the message from this that the need is to create a nuclear program as quickly as possible.
Well, it'd be kind of harder to do that now that all of their stuff is irradiated dust.
Well, we don't know that it is irradiated dust, given that they think they have removed the uranium from...
And so if they move anything around again between the Israelis and us, we pound it flat. I think it changes the dynamic.
And you don't think that hubris on the part of the United States has got us in trouble in that part of the world before? There was already regime change in Iran in the 1950s. They had a progressive prime minister and the CIA deposed him, which led to the Shah, an autocratic, a greedy autocrat, which led to the Islamic Revolution.
Okay, and now we're in a situation where that was a little bit of political to and froing. There's a big difference between that and the potential for nuclear bombs. And I think destroying every known site where they can do that, and they doubtfully have anything the Israelis didn't know about, makes the world a safer place.
I think your point, though, about American intel in Iran, I think you may be right that of our visibility. I would put a lot more weight in the Israelis' visibility into Iran, and they seem to be happy, at least at the position we're in. Joel, I want to get you in on this.
Yeah.
The bigger lesson I seem to take from this is that over and over, we were told by, and I'll call it the think tank blob, that the escalation in the Middle East, taking out Hezbollah, going into Rafah in Gaza, I remember when that was the big debate, taking out Hassan Nasrallah, the original attacks by Israel on Iran, that those were going to be destabilizing. That was going to be the catalyst. And instead, every time the Iranians have effectively been proven to be a lot of bark and not a lot of bite.
Well, just remember, these folks are playing the long game. Just because today it's calm and there's one missile going in doesn't mean that the story is over. And on Iraq, we learned the hard way. There was shock and awe. Things were going well for a couple of months, and then it exploded.
The big difference is we don't have troops on the ground. General,
but we have to be
this
careful.
is an important point. The U.S. military is by far the most superior fighting force in the world, the greatest military that has ever been assembled. That was proven last night. 125 aircraft in the way that mission was flown, 37 hours round trip at every level. The American military does best when there is a very clear mission, very clear orders, and they're given overwhelming force to carry it out. Other than deter Iran right now and respond if attacked, which seems to be where we're at, does anybody right now know what the mission is? What is the end game and goal in one sentence in Iran?
Very simply, supporting the Israeli Air Force to eliminate the ballistic missile program, which now that the nuclear program is destroyed, presumably, is the one remaining threat from the Iranian regime.
Joel, to you, and this will be the final thought. Originally, Benjamin Netanyahu, we need to keep Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. Mm-hmm. The Israelis upped the ante again, that we need to end their nuclear program. Now they seem to say we want to end their nuclear program and end their ballistic missile program and maybe regime change too. Yeah. Are we at mission creep?
We certainly are at rhetorical mission creep, but I don't think that means that the Israelis themselves are going to enact it.
All right. Panel, thank you all very, very much. Where we are right now, 10 p.m. Eastern, President Trump heads to NATO on Tuesday. He is a changed president, and something has become very clear over the past 48 hours. Donald Trump is now very much, if he was not before, a wartime president. That changes things domestically for him politically. We've seen that as Democrats have tried to figure out how to counter what was unquestionably one of the greatest U.S. military successes in the past 20 years. Our special coverage continues with Natasha Zuvess. We'll see you tomorrow night for On Balance.